had always believed my family loved me. That was my first mistake. For 21 years, I had lived in a world of luxury, shielded from pain, from struggle, from the cruel realities of life. Mansions, designer dresses, private jets, these were all I had ever known. And then in a single night everything was ripped away. It happened on my 21st birthday, a day that was supposed to be a celebration of my future. The grand ballroom was filled with guests, all of high status, people my parents called the right kind of people. The chandeliers cast golden light over tables covered in expensive champagne and silk tablecloths. My mother stood beside my father, both of them dressed in their usual pristine perfection. My younger sister Abigail was at my side, smiling sweetly for the cameras. From the outside we looked like the perfect family. But I should have noticed the coldness in their smiles. The way my father's expression was too composed, the way my mother kept glancing at me with unreadable eyes. Then, just as the waiters rolled out the extravagant birthday cake, my father cleared his throat. The room fell silent. And then, in front of hundreds of guests, he spoke the words that would change my life forever. "Evelyn, it's time for you to prove yourself." I blinked confused. "What?" My mother smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Your father and I have decided that your life has been too easy. If you want to inherit the family wealth, you need to earn it." I let out a soft, awkward laugh, expecting her to break into a joke. But no one was laughing. My stomach turned to ice. I looked at my father. What do you mean?" His voice was calm, emotionless. "As of this moment, you have no money, no family connections, and no support. If you can survive without our help and prove your worth, then, and only then, will you regain your place in this family." I froze. "You're joking." But the way he stared at me told me otherwise. They weren't joking. They were serious. The guests murmured in shock, but not a single person stepped forward to defend me. Not my sister. Not even the family friends who had known me since childhood. I turned to Abigail, desperate for her support. "Tell them this is insane." But she just smiled, a slow, smug curve of her lips. "Oh, Evelyn," she sighed dramatically. "You always thought you were better than everyone else. Maybe now you'll learn what it's like to be normal." The room spun around me. No, this wasn't real. This couldn't be real. "You're kicking me out?" I whispered. My mother took a sip of champagne.
"No, darling.
"We're testing you." My fingers clenched into fists. "And if I refuse?" My father shrugged. "Then you'll live your life as a nobody. We will make sure every bank, every business, and every high society connection knows you have nothing. No one will help you." A wave of pure dread washed over me. They weren't just cutting me off. They were ensuring I had no way to survive. I turned and ran from the ballroom, stumbling in my heels, my vision blurring with tears. I needed to think. I needed to escape this nightmare. But before I could even process what was happening, I was grabbed by security. I struggled, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Let me go." The guard's face remained unmoved. "Your parents instructed us to escort you off the property immediately." My own parents. I stopped struggling, my entire body going numb. They led me to the grand entrance of the mansion, my home, the place I had grown up in. And then without hesitation they shoved me outside. The doors slammed shut behind me. I stood there in the freezing night air, dressed in an expensive gown with nowhere to go. The life I had known? Gone. And no one was coming to save me. The cold seeped into my skin, merciless and sharp, as I stood outside the gates of my family's estate, my former home. I had nothing. No money.
No shelter.
No one to call. The reality of my situation pressed down on me like a crushing weight. This wasn't a temporary punishment. This was real. They had thrown me away, and they weren't coming back for me. I stumbled down the empty streets, my heels clicking against the pavement. The city, which once felt like my playground, now loomed around me, foreign and hostile. I reached into my dress pocket for my phone, my hands trembling. I needed help. I dialed the first person that came to mind, Sophia, my childhood best friend. The phone rang once, twice, then voicemail. I swallowed hard, pushing down the rising panic. Maybe she was asleep. I tried someone else. Oliver, my father's business associate's son. The one who had always flirted with me. Voicemail. One by one I called everyone I knew. No one answered. I sent texts, voice messages, desperation leaking into my words. Nothing. They were ignoring me. They knew what had happened, and they had already decided to side with my family. The first night I found shelter under the awning of a closed cafe. I pulled my arms around myself, shivering violently. My once elegant designer dress, now soaked from the rain, clung to my freezing skin. I had never felt this kind of cold before. The kind that sank into my bones, that made my fingers numb and useless. I had never felt this kind of hunger before. The kind that gnawed at my insides, reminding me I hadn't eaten since my birthday party. The irony made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. Hours ago, I had been surrounded by gourmet food, laughter, and music. Now I was shaking in the dark, abandoned like trash. I had never felt so small. The next few days were hell. I tried applying for jobs, but every time I gave my name, the response was the same. Sorry, Miss Lancaster, but we were advised not to be involved. Advised? My family had blacklisted me, made sure no one would help me. I tried selling the diamond earrings I had worn to the party, only to realize I had no way of proving they were mine. The pawnshop owner had laughed in my face. Nice try, princess. I don't deal with thieves. I spent my first week without food. At first, I thought I could survive off scraps, maybe find kindness in a stranger's eyes. But there was no kindness. People avoided me when I walked down the streets, turned their backs when I begged for help. I was Evelyn Lancaster, and no one cared. The moment I realized I was no longer human in their eyes was when a man in a sharp suit walked past me outside a luxury hotel. I recognized him. He was a friend of my father's, someone who had dined at our home dozens of times. Relief flooded me as I stumbled toward him. Mr. Calloway. My voice came out cracked and weak. He turned, eyes narrowing. I smiled, trying to maintain some dignity. It's me, Evelyn. You know me. Please, I just need help. Recognition flickered in his eyes, then disappeared. His gaze turned cold. I don't know you, he said. And he walked away. Like I was nothing. Like I had never existed. That night I collapsed. My body, starved and exhausted, finally gave out. I had been working at a cheap diner, washing dishes in exchange for scraps of food. But my hands were too weak, my vision too blurry. I barely noticed the burning pain in my stomach before the world went black. When I woke up, I was in a dimly lit hospital room. I blinked at the white ceiling, confusion creeping in. Why was I here? How was I alive? And then I saw him. A man sitting in the corner of the room, dressed in a sharp suit, watching me with unreadable eyes. You don't look like someone who gives up easily, he said, leaning forward. His voice was calm, assessing. There was no pity in his gaze, only calculation. Who are you? I croaked, my throat raw. He smirked. Someone who can change your life. The man in the suit watched me carefully, his dark eyes filled with calm calculation rather than pity. I wasn't sure what was more unnerving, his presence or the fact that I was still alive. Who are you? I rasped, my throat raw from days of starvation and exhaustion. The stranger smirked. Someone who can change your life. I narrowed my eyes. Why would you want to help me? His smirk widened slightly. Because I see something in you. He tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Most people would have broken by now. I scoffed, shifting slightly in the hospital bed. Who says I haven't? His eyes flickered with something unreadable. You're still breathing, aren't you? That shut me up. Because he was right. Despite everything, despite being abandoned, starving, humiliated, and pushed to the edge of death, I was still here. And I wasn't dead yet. His name was Vincent Blackwell. A businessman. A strategist. A man whose name carried weight in the corporate world, underground dealings, and political circles alike. He told me he had been watching me for a while, that my fall from grace had caught his attention. First, I thought he was lying. But when he handed me a folder, filled with photos and documents about my family, my past, and my struggles, I realized the truth. Vincent knew everything. And yet, he had no intention of saving me out of kindness. Don't get me wrong, Evelyn, he said smoothly. This isn't charity. I don't do favors. I clenched my fists under the blanket. Then what do you want? He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. I want to make a deal. Vincent made it very clear. He didn't help people unless they had something to offer. And what I had? Potential. You have something rare, he said. A reason to fight. A reason to win. I scoffed. I have nothing. He smirked. Then let's change that. His offer. He would train me, teach me, give me the tools to take back everything I lost and more. In exchange, I would work for him. Loyalty, strategy, power. Those were the things he valued. And in return, I would become someone my family could never break again. I had a choice. I could walk away, return to the streets, and let my parents win. Or I could take his hand, step into the unknown, and rewrite my story. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I held out my hand, and I shook his. Vincent didn't waste time. The moment I left the hospital, I was thrown into a new world. There was no softness.
No paciencia.
Only brutal training. I learned how business worked, how people were manipulated, how money and power weren't about luck, they were about control. I learned how to read people, how to lie when necessary, how to recognize who could be bought and who could be broken. I spent months studying, working, preparing. The Evelyn my family had abandoned? She was gone. In her place stood Eve Whitmore, a woman who was ruthless, untouchable, and more powerful than they could ever imagine. One day, Vincent handed me a folder. I flipped it open and froze. The name on the front? Lancaster Enterprises. My family's company. My former inheritance. I looked up at Vincent, my heart pounding. You knew. He smirked. Of course I did. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. It's time you take what's yours, Eve. I stared down at the documents. My fingers tightened around the edges. I had rebuilt myself from nothing. Now, I was going to destroy them. I sat at my desk, flipping through the financial reports of Lancaster Enterprises. Their numbers were bleeding. Profits were dropping. Investments were crumbling. Competitors were rising against them. It was beautiful. I had spent months carefully orchestrating their downfall, step by step, ensuring they never saw the knife in their back, until it was too late. And the best part? They had no idea it was me. For years, my parents had been untouchable. Their influence stretched across business, media, and high society. Their name alone could open doors that others could only dream of. But not anymore, because I had made sure of it. First, I disrupted their supply chains. Then I targeted their partnerships, ensuring that powerful investors slowly pulled away, choosing competitors instead. One by one, their carefully built business empire started to rot from the inside. And just as I had predicted, they were panicking. My opportunity came when Lancaster Enterprises faced a crippling financial crisis. The company had overextended itself, investing in risky ventures they believed would secure their dominance. But those investments, I had sabotaged them. They were now drowning in debt, lawsuits, and bad press. And as their world burned, I did the most satisfying thing of all. I sent them a lifeline. A mysterious investor willing to rescue them from ruin. Me. The Lancaster family rarely allowed outsiders into their private meetings. But today, they had no choice. I sat at the long mahogany conference table, watching as my father, mother, and sister walked in, completely unaware of who I was. My father's face was tight with strain, his once sharp confidence dulled by exhaustion. My mother, who had once looked down on me with cold indifference, was now forced to greet me with a smile. And Abigail? She barely spared me a glance, too focused on her phone, still deluded into thinking she would inherit a powerful empire. I watched them closely, waiting for even the faintest flicker of recognition. But there was none. I had changed too much, and they had never cared enough to look. Good. That made this even better. My father cleared his throat, forcing a polite smile. Miss Whitmore, he began, we appreciate you considering an investment in our company. I nodded, leaning back in my chair. From what I've seen, Lancaster Enterprises is in a rather unfortunate situation. My mother visibly stiffened, while my father's jaw tensed. No one liked hearing the truth, especially not people who once thought themselves invincible. That's why we're open to partnership opportunities, he said carefully. A strong investor like yourself would be highly valued. I almost laughed. The same people who had thrown me away were now begging for my help. I let the silence stretch, enjoying their discomfort. Then I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. And tell me. I ran my fingers along the smooth wooden table, my voice soft yet sharp. What would happen if I didn't invest? My father's mask cracked for just a second. Miss Whitmore, my mother interjected, her voice dripping with forced charm. Surely you understand that businesses have their highs and lows. But with your support, Lancaster Enterprises will remain at the top. I smiled, but there was nothing kind about it. Will it? A flicker of doubt flashed in her eyes. She didn't know why, but something about me unsettled her. Like an old memory lurking just out of reach. Good. Let them feel that unease. Because soon, I was going to destroy them. Silence stretched across the Lancaster Enterprises boardroom as I leaned forward. My hands clasped, my expression unreadable. Across from me, my father, mother, and sister sat stiffly, trying to mask their desperation. But I could see it. The way my father's fingers twitched against the table. The way my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her breathing uneven. The way Abigail's brows furrowed, her usual arrogance replaced with nervous energy. They were losing everything. And they knew it. I let the tension linger before I spoke. There's a condition to my investment. My father sat up straighter, eager, ready to accept anything. Of course, he said quickly. We're willing to discuss terms. I smiled, slow and deliberate. You'll sign over full control of Lancaster Enterprises to me. The room went dead silent. My mother's eyes snapped to mine, her composed mask shattering for the first time. What? She whispered. Abigail, who had been scrolling through her phone like this meeting was beneath her, finally looked up, her face twisting in disbelief. You can't be serious, she scoffed. You want us to hand over our company? Our legacy. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. Your legacy? I repeated. Interesting. Because from what I've seen, this company is a sinking ship. You should be grateful someone is willing to save it. Abigail's cheeks flushed with anger. This company doesn't need saving, she snapped. I chuckled, reaching for the folder in front of me. I flipped it open, revealing the financial reports, the losses, the debts stacking up. I slid it across the table. My father's face went pale. I think the numbers say otherwise, I said, leaning back. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, realization hitting him like a slap. They hadn't just lost money. They had lost everything. This isn't possible, my mother muttered, shaking her head. Who are you? I smiled. And then I said the words that shattered their world. I'm Evelyn. The reaction was instant. My father froze, the color draining from his face. My mother's breath hitched, her fingers trembling. And Abigail? Her lips parted, her eyes wide with horror. No, she whispered. That's not possible. I lifted my chin, my smile never fading. It's been years, I said softly. I don't blame you for not recognizing me. After all, you never really looked at me, did you? Abigail pushed back from the table, shaking her head. This is some joke. Evelyn is gone. I finished for her. Dead. She said nothing. Because she knew the truth. They had erased me, forgotten me. And now I was standing before them, stronger than they could ever imagine. My mother was the first to snap. She reached for me. Actually reached for me, like she had suddenly remembered she was supposed to be a mother. Evelyn, she gasped. We thought you. I stepped back, cold amusement flickering in my eyes. You thought I'd disappear forever? I asked. She flinched. Good. Evelyn, please, my father tried, his voice carefully controlled, though I could hear the panic beneath it. We never meant for things to go this far, he continued. We thought you'd come back. That you'd prove yourself and return home. Return home? I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. You threw me out like garbage, I said. You wanted to test me? Congratulations. I passed. I leaned forward, my voice lowering to a sharp whisper. And now you're the ones who failed. My father's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists as he struggled to keep control. We're still family, he forced out. You wouldn't do this to your own blood. I laughed. It was the first real genuine laugh I had in years. I met his desperate gaze, my smile sharp. You stopped being my family the day you turned your back on me. He sucked in a sharp breath. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. And Abigail? She stood there, frozen, realizing for the first time that she had lost, that she would never win against me again. I stood up, adjusting my blazer, preparing to leave. You can sign the papers, I said. Or you can let Lancaster Enterprises crumble completely. The choice is yours. I turned to leave, but before I could take another step, my mother's voice broke. Evelyn, she pleaded, please don't do this. I paused, my back still to them. A long silence stretched between us. Then I slowly turned my head, meeting her gaze one last time. You did this to yourselves, I whispered. And then I walked away. The air outside the Lancaster Enterprises building was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension that had filled the boardroom moments ago. For the first time in years, I felt light, as if the weight of my past had finally lifted from my shoulders. I had done it. I had won. By the time I stepped into my car, the damage had already been done. The moment my parents realized I wasn't bluffing, they signed away full control of Lancaster Enterprises to me. They had no other choice. They were drowning in debt, scandals, and failures, all orchestrated by my careful planning. I had ensured they were completely helpless. And now they were nothing more than a family with a famous last name and no power to back it up. Over the next few weeks, news of the takeover spread like wildfire. The media, once obsessed with glorifying the Lancaster name, now painted a different picture. Collision. Eve Whitmore takes over Lancaster Enterprises in a ruthless power move. Collision. Lancaster family loses control. What led to their downfall? Collision, who is the mysterious businesswoman who outsmarted high society? Every headline, every article, every whisper in the business world cemented my victory. The same people who once ignored me, discarded me, abandoned me. Now they couldn't stop talking about me. A week after the takeover, my mother showed up at my office. I almost didn't let her in, but a part of me wanted to see the broken woman she had become. When she walked in, she looked smaller, as if the loss of power had physically diminished her presence. I didn't offer her a seat. She didn't ask for one. Instead, she stood before my desk, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Evelyn, she began softly, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. I raised a hand, cutting her off. It's Eve. She flinched. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. What do you want? Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. Because there was nothing left to say. I had beaten them. And she knew it. My mother exhaled shakily. I just wanted to know. Is there any way to fix this? She looked at me with something that almost resembled regret. But I had spent too many years waiting for that regret. And now? I didn't care. I stood up, straightening my blazer. There's nothing to fix, I said simply. You made your choices. And now you get to live with them. Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not relief. Just nothing. And that was how I knew I had truly won. I walked past her, heading for the door. She turned, her voice breaking. Eve, please. I paused at the doorway, glancing over my shoulder. And then I said the last words I would ever speak to her. You should have answered my call when I begged for help. And with that, I walked away. I never looked back. As I didn't need to. My parents had tried to test me, to see if I was worthy of their love, their fortune, their name. And in doing so, they lost everything. But I had gained the only thing that mattered. Myself. As I stepped outside into the sun, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I was finally free.